And Ken Harrison has said multiple times, Promise Keepers relaunching, we're not doing it for ourselves. It's not really for the men. We're doing it for our wives and our children. So I believe that women praying for the men will be critical in this next phase of Promise Keepers. So that evening, we're gonna spend 90 minutes in worship, listening to Judge Vance Day's Passion for Men, and we're going to have time of desperate prayers, and we're also going to ask God to release His favor and blessing and revival throughout Dallas, Fort Worth, Metroplex as well.
Let's we can, also point people to the website because, as you mentioned, promisekeepers.org, some people listening right now say, I really need to mobilize my church or my prayer ministry in my church so that they will know that this is taking place in 2020, but also that there's a prayer meeting on June 25th. Are there some resources that people can use to really begin to mobilize people even in their own small group or their Bible fellowship or church?
Well, eventually we will have more and more things in place on promisekeepers.org. Now, if you want to get the details regarding what's going to take place at Dallas Gateway on June 25th and these other 4 locations, you could go to my website, which is prayersurgenow.net, the one that you said at the beginning of our program.
Okay.
That will give you all the dates and all the addresses, and it'll include my phone number, contact information, phone number, and email address. And anyone who has any questions pertaining to Promise Keepers, including these 5 opportunities to mobilize prayer in these 5 major regions of Texas, anyone could email info@pknet.org, info@pknet.org. For guys who are planning on being at AT&T Stadium, please go to promisekeepers.org, and you can pre-register. That means you'll get a priority. You will get a priority email, so you can register before everybody else. And then for everybody else, all the registration, ticket purchase, and everything will be ready on August 1st, 1 year before next year's stadium event.
Let me also mention Ann Cuesta, since you're the Dallas location here, maybe we can also, if somebody has some specific questions, we can funnel some information to you as well, because you obviously are very familiar with the Gateway Church there in Hillcrest, and of course you're also familiar with what's going to take place. So can you also be kind of our local Dallas contact?
Well, if it's all right with Dai, it's all right. And my email is ann@unityquest.org.
And again, we have all those links here at Point of View. Dai Sup, just for a moment, let's again talk about the importance of prayer. This is a strategic event. We're talking not just about 80,000 men. We're talking about maybe millions of men nationwide. And these events do not take place unless we really do spend time on our knees praying. So as we are winding down this interview, share with us one more time a challenge for why we should be joining with you on June 25th and why we should be praying even now about something that will happen in July of 2020. It's not too early to start praying about that event right now, is it?
Yes, that's right. I mean, a lot of times we begin to pray a day or two before elections. Sometimes by then it's kind of too late. So a lot of people are praying for the elections now for 2020. But at the same time, you all need to be praying for the 2020 Promise Keepers Men's Conference starting now. I don't care where you are, what situation you're in, begin to pray, because we believe it is God's will that we mobilize 5 million men to join in one conference, and that those 5 million men would begin to bring transformation to our families, to our communities. And that will take literally a mighty power of God, heaven on earth, moving in cities across America. And I really want to challenge Texas brothers and sisters, take ownership. Promise Keepers is relaunching through your state, through the DFW region in 2020 with that stadium gathering. Take responsibility and take ownership and begin to pray for the men in your lives. any wives or daughters listening in, pray for your fathers, husbands, and brothers. Pray for them and ask God to touch them with his Father heart of God, that they may walk out of any situation they're in, any sin, any challenge of life. They will just surrender their lives to the Lord and live their lives as promise keepers. This is so important. Without prayer, without God answering our prayers, promise keepers, this next phase, this new era, will not go too far. So we are in desperate need of everyone's prayer. And please join Ann and me, and Kerby, we'd love for you to join us as well at Gateway Campus there in Dallas on Monday, June 25th. Get there by 6:30. Be ready to worship and pray starting at 7 p.m. I believe God will visit us, and God will touch our lives and hear our prayers.
And again, that's Tuesday, June 25th, 7 p.m., Gateway Church. And just a great opportunity for you to join together. Ann, any final comments?
I'm really excited because Ken is a man that is calling these men to come back and be servant kings. And this book is wonderful. I recommend it highly. Anybody that wants to get an opportunity to read about Ken and about all of this going on. And especially, I want to thank Dai Sup for all that he is doing.
Well, again, I appreciate both of you. This will not be the only time we'll do the promotion for that, but I wanted people to mark June 25th on their calendar. And for those of you that are in Tyler or Houston, San Antonio, Austin, we have those dates and times as well. So, again, visit the website. We've got some great links there, and I want to thank you both. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Well, hope that was encouraging to you to find out a little bit more about the Promise Keepers event, and I hope that you'll take the time to mark your calendar and attend the event if you are a man on July 31st and August 1st, or, of course, all of you are invited to a prayer event taking place on Tuesday, June 25th. I actually have an event that evening, but if it gets moved or canceled, I will plan to be there myself. But at the moment, I do have a prior engagement. And as we mentioned, all through that week, whether you live in Tyler or Houston or San Antonio, there are opportunities for you to join in a prayer event, and I would encourage you to do so. Let me mention that we have a couple of things on our website. First of all, you can find out more about Promise Keepers. We have that link there. Just simply find where you have the picture of Dai Sup Han, and that will take you there. Let me just, as a program note, mention that Afshin Ziafat will be with us. He is a former Muslim who's become a Christian, who is a pastor now of a church in the Dallas area, and so certainly that would be of interest to anybody in Dallas, but I'm going to have him on the national program just to talk about how we can witness to our Muslim friends, neighbors, co-workers, some of his own testimony experience. We have an article that appeared about him in Decision Magazine, the Billy Graham organization, so that's all available. And if you go to our website, you'll notice that we've got this picture of a rising sun. It's entitled, "It's Morning in America." That, of course, is the theme that Ronald Reagan used back in 1980. And the 1980s were a time in which we had some of the same kind of situations, in which you had a stagnant economy and some directions that were not very encouraging. Well, with the change of some of the economic policy of Ronald Reagan, as well as the appointment of people like Antonin Scalia to the courts, we've seen some very significant changes. And even though I will acknowledge there's a striking difference between Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump, some of the similarities are that as well, in that we have seen the economy booming at a time when some people were saying that's probably not going to happen. Jobs coming back. Matter of fact, more jobs than we have people to fill them. And also, if you have ever listened to any of our Friday Weekend Edition programs with Kelly Shackelford or Jeremy Dice or Lathan Watts or Chelsea Uman or anybody, you know that we also have seen a remarkable number of individuals being put on the federal court who believe in a strict interpretation of the Constitution. As a matter of fact, Penna Dexter's commentary, which we will play tomorrow and which would show up in your inbox on Saturday if you signed up to receive it, goes into that in a little more detail. So anyway, one of the reasons we're talking about this idea of morning in America is we are excited about some of the positive things happening, while we still are talking about, of course, some of the negative issues that need to be addressed. And that's why we encourage you to join with us as we come to the end of our fiscal year. That is June 30th, and there's a button there that says Give Now, and your gift of any size would be greatly appreciated. We already have posted that we have a matching fund there, so your gift of $10 becomes $20, your gift of $100 becomes $200. And I hope some of you might even consider not only just a one-time gift before the end of our fiscal year, but some of you might even say, you know, maybe I could just really join with you on a monthly basis and join the Truth Team. And we suggest that for even as little as $1 a day or more, you can support us on a monthly basis, and that is so helpful to us. It provides a level of stability that we certainly need, especially during, as we bring this up, during our summer months. When people travel, that's when we sometimes don't hear as much from individuals, and so if you can help us out, we would greatly appreciate that. I'm going to get to my commentary in just a minute, but I thought I would pick up a piece from yesterday. One of the articles I posted for yesterday, and if you'd like to find it, all you have to do is go to pointofview.net, and there's a navigation button, and just go to shows, and then you can go to yesterday's program, and you'll see that one of the articles I posted was an article that comes from our friend Dennis Prager, which is entitled Leftism Makes People Meaner, Reflections on the Torture of Paul Manafort. And he says the sadistic treatment of Paul Manafort illustrates something I believe since I attended graduate school in the 1970s and saw the behavior of left-wing students. Leftism makes people meaner. He says they're kind and mean conservatives and they're kind and mean liberals. Neither liberalism nor conservatism makes people kinder or meaner. But that's not the case, he says, with leftism. With the handful of exceptions that accompany every generation, leftism makes people meaner, even crueler. Now, to understand that, you have to recognize something I've mentioned before on this program, and that is he makes a distinction between the left and liberalism. Matter of fact, in just a minute, where I'm going to quote from Alan Dershowitz, who would be a good example of someone who believes in liberalism. A liberal would say, even though I disagree with your position on whatever it is, same-sex marriage or abortion or even drugs or whatever it might be, I defend your right to express that view. A leftist would say, no, you don't even have a right to that view, that your views are toxic and you do not deserve a place at the table. Well, you can see once you've adopted that idea that your ideas don't deserve a hearing, you can see how also people that hold those ideas don't necessarily have to be treated with humanity. And so that's the point that Dennis Prager is making. He says that Rikers is a place where, indeed, Paul Manafort has been dropped. And if you're not familiar with New York's Rikers Island prison, let me just quote from a man I just mentioned a minute ago who's been on this program, Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz said, quote, the decision to move Paul Manafort from the decent federal prison to which he was sentenced to solitary confinement to the dangerous blank hole that is New York City's Rikers Island seems abusive and possibly illegal. Then Alan Dershowitz went on to say, I know Rikers well, having spent time there visiting numerous defendants accused of murder and other violent crimes. It is a terrible place that no one ever wants to be sent to. Well, who goes to Rikers Island? Well, that would be mass murderers and people that maybe have tortured other individuals, the worst of the worst. And Paul Manafort is guilty of crime. No doubt about it. Not trying to excuse that, not saying that he doesn't deserve punishment, but he is guilty, as everybody points out here. Paul Manafort is guilty of what we would call white-collar crimes, and yet he's being placed in solitary confinement. Again, one of the things that Dennis Prager writes, and this is something I wanted to I might even add this to my book on the criminal justice issue in my Christian Ethics in Plain Language, because I'd never really got into the impact that solitary confinement has on human beings and on your brain and those kinds of things. But nevertheless, Dennis Prager puts it this way. He said, everyone who has written about solitary confinement, both on the right and the left, deems it torture. Manafort will therefore be tortured after being sentenced to 7 years imprisonment for fraud and for, in the words of the Daily Wire, a little-known law that requires lobbyists to report that they are working on behalf of foreign governments. In this case, he was working for Ukraine. Angry over the possibility that Manafort will be pardoned by President Trump, the Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance charged Manafort with additional crimes based on state law. That way, if found guilty of state offenses, he cannot be pardoned by Trump, as the president's power to pardon applies only to federal, not state crimes. Everyone knows this prosecution is politically motivated. Vance hates the president, wants to use solitary confinement and put him in a place where there are violent criminals to squeeze Manafort into testifying against the president. And as Dennis Prager says, as Alan Dershowitz said to me on my radio program, what Vance is doing reminds him of Stalin or other individuals who were actually involved in that kind of practice in, of course, the old Soviet Union. Now, to her credit, Dennis Prager points out that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, quote, a prison sentence is not a license for government torture and human rights violations. That's what solitary confinement is. Manafort should be released along with other people being held in solitary. So again, he said, matter of fact, Dennis Prager says, I might add that my opposition to Manafort's treatment is not partisan or new. On a number of occasions over the years, I've cited favorably New York Review of book articles describing the horror of solitary confinement. Despite its history of opposition to solitary confinement, the New York Times article reporting the plan to relocate Manafort has nothing against the unnecessary transfer, but did comment on the expensive suits Manafort used to wear. And even as the police commissioner, at least former police commissioner, Bernard Cleric pointed out, solitary confinement is basically a death trap. And Manafort was placed in a solitary in a federal prison. Manafort should never have been sentenced to solitary confinement, but Robert Mueller and the judge, Amy Berman Jackson, sought it for the same political reason that Vance has to, and that is to break the man. So I just thought I would point that out. It's another illustration of an excessive punishment for a crime that deserves punishment, but not that kind of punishment. And it also goes into a little more detail, and I won't read all of that, about the impact, the horrible impact that solitary confinement oftentimes has on individuals. That's the kind of thing that happens in other countries. Shouldn't be happening in the United States. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention at the top of the hour, Afshin Ziafat is going to be with us, a former Muslim's journey to Christ. And we have that article that appeared in Decision Magazine. He'll be in studio with us, and that's an opportunity for you not only to hear his testimony, but maybe to ask any question that you have about how to witness to your Muslim friends, or things to say or not to say, things to do or not to do if you invite them over to dinner. So I just hope that that will be a way in which we can minister to you. In the third hour, if you would like to listen online, Jerry Newcombe will be with us. We'll be talking about the role of God in the public arena. There is a move to try to add God to some place in the World War II memorial. If you heard me last week as I read the speech, which was really the prayer by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He mentions God continuously, and we'll talk about all the different ways in which Franklin Delano Roosevelt and others mentioned God during World War II. There's no mention of God or faith or anything in the World War II monument, so people are talking about that. And then also, he's written a previous column about the fact that our Democratic friends in Congress no longer have you swear, "So help me God." You just can swear, but you don't have to say, "So help me God." And so we'll talk about the role of God in the public arena with Jerry Newcombe in the third hour. Let me just mention my commentary today is called Style Guide, and the reason I do that is to recognize that the way in which the press, the media, journalists are communicating ideas oftentimes affects the way in which you perceive those. And one of the phrases you've probably heard me use many times on this program is, "He who defines the words often wins the debate." And all sorts of words are being redefined. Matter of fact, in the third hour today, when I have a little more time, I'm going to talk about this article about how people are talking about the abortion debate banning equality. Well, there's no equality issue here, but it was a focus-driven word that seemed to work well for the same-sex marriage debate. So we're going to say that anybody who's trying to actually enact pro-life legislation is banning equality, and get into how those words have been manipulated. Well, in the column here, I talk about a couple of examples of that that have surfaced. One, of course, is an issue we talk about quite often, and as a matter of fact, something I've written about. Here's my little article here on climate change, and that used to be called global warming, which I think should, if nothing else, tip you off to the fact that, yes, people no longer talk about global warming, they talk about climate change, because nobody can deny that climate's changed, because obviously we've had an ice age, we've had a warming period, and all of the rest. Well, that's not enough. For The Guardian, in particular, their style manual now says that climate change is now going to be called climate emergency, a climate crisis, or climate breakdown. The term global warming, when they use it, doesn't seem hot enough, so now it's going to be called global heating. And a person who raises questions about that will now be called a climate science denier. So you can see that those games are getting played even rougher than they were before. And again, he who defines the term sometimes can win the debate. The issue of abortion is what I wanted to focus on for just a minute, because I've always had problems. I remember in a debate a while back with the Dallas Morning News, they kept saying, well, we're trying to be fair about this, the debate in this particular case about, how do they describe it? Reproductive freedom. I was trying to remember how they described it. And I said, well, you're not being fair, because let's face it, if you believe that there is life inside the womb, you can't be called pro-life. You have to be called anti-abortion. Okay, so if you call us anti-abortion, then you should call the others pro-abortion. Oh, no, we can't do that. They're called pro-choice. So even though I think the fair way to say it would be pro-life, pro-choice, they have it anti-abortion, pro-choice. And so you already see that happening. Well, it's gotten out of hand now, because if you look at National Public Radio, their style guide now, they're even saying terms like pro-life, late-term abortion, fetal heartbeat, partial birth abortion. They're just not even supposed to use those terms. Those are no longer acceptable terms when you're writing or broadcasting on NPR. So you might say, okay, well, then what do they call partial birth abortion? I recognize that may not necessarily be a perfectly medical term, but it describes the fact that here someone is partially being born, and then now you're, I won't go into the details, but destroying that baby before it's born. Well, that's called intact dilation and extraction. By the way, I made a mistake there. You can't call it a baby until it's fully born. It's a fetus up until even, and even when the head is crowning, it's still a fetus. It's not a baby till it comes completely out of the womb. And are there terms that are completely off limits, or like abortion doctor, abortion clinics? Well, you get the idea. So anyway, that's my commentary for today. And it's just a reminder that you're going to just have to pay attention and use discernment when you're listening to and watching and reading various things. But also, I'm starting to see something else. We've noticed that more and more people, as they're pushing back on the fact that there have been some heartbeat bills and so-called anti-abortion bills, that then there was a question that was raised of a senator just the other day about shouldn't a judicial nominee be more independent? Because his argument was very simply that this is an individual that should always be pro-abortion. And here's what Gary Bauer cites. The senator said, I think there's some issues that have such moral clarity that we have as a society decided that the other side is not acceptable. Imagine saying that it's okay to appoint a judge who's racist or anti-Semitic or homophobic. Telling or asking someone to appoint a judge who takes away basic human rights of any group of people in America, I don't think those political issues are relevant anymore. So you kind of see the argument that's now being foisted upon the American people. I think most people would say, I don't need to have an open discussion about slavery. We know that that is wrong, and we've settled that. We don't have to have an open discussion about the Holocaust. We know that it took place, and we know it was wrong. But now to say that a view of the fact that there is life inside the womb is sort of beyond the pale and not open for discussion, I think illustrates it only so well. And as Gary Bauer says, it's not just the sanctity of life. The left is using this tactic to make a host of normally conservative values, as he said, beyond the pale of discussion and debate. To believe in border security, he says, is racist. To believe in traditional marriage or that there are two genders is bigotry. To question some of the questions about climate change is to be a science denier. And so you're seeing that some of the ways in which these debates are being framed on the college campus and in many progressive institutions is also surfacing in the style guide being used by many of the press. And as I've said before, you can learn a great deal about bias by how words are phrased. You can also learn a great deal about bias about what isn't covered. And it is striking to me to look at the style guide to see so many different words cannot be used, so many different kinds of things cannot be said. And one of the arguments there is that a baby is not a baby till it's born. And my favorite line, which you've heard me use before, but I'll use it again, my wife has never gone to a fetus shower. She's always gone to a baby shower. And so it's a baby when we want it, but it's a fetus or a product of conception when we don't. And that kind of linguistic gymnastics is a good example of what we'll talk about in the third hour today after we spend some time with our good friend Jerry Newcombe. But let's take a break, and while we do so, I would encourage you to go to the website. You can find our Morning in America banner, our matching fund now. So if you'd like to give $100 right now, just even as we go to a break, that $100 becomes $200. You can click on that button that says Give Now. The Viewpoint Style Guide is there, and a little bit later I'll even read a little bit from Penna Dexter's commentary, which will air tomorrow, and actually will show up in your inbox on Saturday if you signed up to receive it. Let's take a break. We've got a lot more to cover, and we'll do that right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
I think you're really going to enjoy this interview this hour, because we're going to spend some time talking about a topic that we do address on a regular basis, and that is how to reach out to our Muslim friends, neighbors, and coworkers, maybe even family members. And we're going to have a chance to hear just a really dynamic testimony, first of all, and then maybe get some help and hints about what to do or what not to do, what to say, what not to say when you're with your Muslim friends. And so we bring to the microphone somebody I've been hearing about for some time. Matter of fact, I might just mention that there's just an excellent article that appeared in the January 19th issue this year of Decision Magazine, the magazine of the Billy Graham Organization. So we have that on our website. And Afshin Ziafat is the lead pastor now of Providence Church in Frisco, Texas, but as an individual growing up from an Iranian family, growing up under Islam, eventually left Islam for Christianity. And, of course, you'll hear the rest of the story as he goes through all of this. Helped launch the Vertical Bible Study at Baylor University. He's a graduate of seminary as well. We'll give you all his credentials in just a minute, but I've been hearing about you for some time, so it is great to get you in studio. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
And again, you are now a lead pastor, so you certainly have thought a lot about how to reach out. And I know that you used to travel in the Middle East training Iranian pastors about how to reach out to those individuals with the gospel. So you bring a lot of expertise as well as your own personal testimony, don't you?
Well, the Lord has been very gracious to me and opened up doors that I wouldn't have even dreamed of. So for sure.
Well, I guess we need to tell the story. And that is, you actually lived in Houston, but then your family went to Iran. Then you came back. And so let's talk about the early part of your life, because that's key to you having learned Farsi, learning Islam, and then, of course, later how God used that in your ability to witness to others. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so when we came back to Houston when I was 6 years old, middle of first grade, there was a Christian lady who was my tutor, and she was reading me books after school every day, teaching me the English language. So in the second grade, she said, Afshin, I've been reading you all these books. Now I want to hand you the most important book you'll ever get in your life. Yes. She handed me a small New Testament. She said, you're not going to understand this now if you read it, but promise me you'll hold on to it and read it when you're older. So she plants a seed in my life in the second grade that wouldn't come to fruition until 10 years later. Yeah. And by the way, she gave me that New Testament during the Iran hostage crisis when many people turned against us just because we were from Iran. Right. So I'm thankful, because had any other American honestly handed me that New Testament, I would have probably thrown it away. But since it came from her, who loved me and poured herself into me, and she really earned the right to be heard by me. And so when she gave me the New Testament, I held on to it. So I grew up in a Muslim home, and my dad, a very prominent Muslim in Houston, so all I ever was taught was the 5 pillars of faith of Islam, and basically if I did those to the best of my ability, then maybe I'd get to heaven, and was taught that Jesus is merely a prophet. So my senior year in high school, I became curious about the person of Jesus through various things that happened, conversations I had. Right. And God put that New Testament on my mind. I said, I think I got a Bible somewhere. And I went looking throughout my room. And if you can believe this, after 10 years, I found that small New Testament sitting at the bottom of my closet waiting for me. So I opened it up and start reading the book of Matthew, and read that whole book of Matthew in one sitting. Now, I didn't understand all of it, but every night under the covers with a flashlight, I'd keep reading. Yes. So my parents wouldn't walk in and figure out what was happening. I would just sneak to read that Bible. And was really debating with this Christian kid at my high school.
I heard about that. Yeah.
As he's debating on the side of Christianity, I'm debating on the side of Islam. But honestly, when I came to Romans 3 is when the light turned on for me. In Romans 3, I started reading about a righteousness that comes apart from the law, apart from what I do, but that it comes through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. And that all was big for me because I thought I was born a Muslim, I was stamped a Muslim, but that's it for anyone who believes.
Right.
And so a couple of weeks after that, I'm invited to an evangelistic kind of event, and I went on September 28th of 1989 and heard the gospel, and I became a Christian. So honestly, for me, man, it was really a revolution in Iran that prompted my family moving to Houston. It was a teacher who loved me, poured herself into me. It was a guy who was debating with me. It was a guy who finally invited me to an event, and it was someone who preached the gospel. So for me, if someone asks me, what's the best way to reach someone? Do you think it's event evangelism, or do you think it's one-on-one or relational? I say yes, because God used all of that for me. Yeah.
And I might point out that the reason you came back to Houston, because your father, I think he was a prominent physician at the time, was in Iran, and then you have the Iranian Revolution.
Sure, yes.
And Ayatollah Khomeini and all that. And so that brought you back. But again, you're a little displaced because you're an Iranian Muslim family in the United States.
Right.
And so just before we take a break, I guess we'll tell the rest of the story. Okay, now you've become a Christian, and you're thinking, what am I going to tell my father?
Exactly. So I'm a bit ashamed to say this because, you know what? For a year and a half, I hid it from him. I would sneak out to go to church, hide my Bible, all these things. So my dad finally finds out. He saw evidences in my life, and he sits me down, and he goes, what's going on? And I said, well, Dad, I'm a Christian. He said, excuse me? I said, I'm a Christian. He said, no, you're not. You're a Muslim, and you'll always be a Muslim.
That's right.
And I said, Dad, the Bible says if I trust in Christ for my salvation, then I'm a Christian, and I do. So my dad basically made me choose between him and Jesus. And I want you to know, man, everything in me wanted to say, forget it, I'll be a Muslim. My flesh, that's what I wanted to say. So I say that so you know I'm not boasting, because even I was surprised, and I think it was the Lord speaking through me when I said, Dad, if I have to choose between you and Jesus, then I choose Jesus. So my father disowns me on the spot. And the definitive moment of my life is when I went to my room and basically said, God, how could you allow this to happen to me? You know, I followed you, all this, and the Lord humbled me. He led me to a passage in Matthew 10 where I read Jesus saying, whoever acknowledges me before men, I will acknowledge him before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before men, I'll disown him. And then right after that, and I got to remember, I'm reading this right after my dad disowned me. Jesus says, for I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, Jesus says. And then he says, whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And so let me just say really quickly, that's when I understood, Kerby, what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Not just to believe the right things. That's not the call. And that doesn't mean God hates the family and wants to tear up the family, but it means that even that precious relationship of a family should not come between you and following Jesus. And so I'm not perfect by any means, but that day I said, Jesus, I trust you. I'll follow you, even if it cost me my dad.
Again, trusting in your eternal heavenly Father causes you discomfort is a mild word for the relationship with your earthly father. And I think it illustrates something we're going to talk about when we come back. And that is why Muslim evangelism is so difficult, because you're giving up not just your culture and your faith, but your whole livelihood, your family. There's a cost, a terrible cost that you face, indeed. And I did want you to know a little bit more about Afshin Ziafat, and you can find out about him by doing a couple of things. First of all, if you go to the website, we have a link to his church where he is the lead pastor. I think you're going to really enjoy that, Providence Church. But if you scroll down a little bit further, we have this article that appeared in Decision Magazine. I would really encourage you to take the time to print it out, maybe pass it around, say, I just heard this interview with this individual. And then, of course, you can also maybe even provide a link to individuals that might want to hear this again, because we have a podcast link. We also have a link because this is on YouTube, so maybe this would be something that would be useful to you. We have a lot more to cover, as you imagine, and we will do that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A phrase they often use is, "He who defines the words often wins the debate." I've seen this play out in debates, discussions, and interviews. I've also seen how the way you define terms can influence the reader's perception. That is why the latest information about the style guides being used in the media are a reminder to exercise discernment. Take the issue of climate change, or what used to be called global warming. That change alone should signal the fact that words and definitions are being manipulated so that readers could come to a particular conclusion. The Guardian recently updated its style guide in order to show their increased concern over the environment. For example, climate change will now be referred to as a climate emergency crisis or breakdown. The term global warming doesn't seem hot enough, so it will now be called global heating. And a skeptic of all this will now be called a climate science denier. Abortion is another illustration. For years, I've complained that the terms are not parallel. Someone who supports abortion is not called pro-abortion, but is given the more neutral term pro-choice. However, you can't call someone pro-life because they must be labeled anti-abortion. Jarrett Stepman reports that NPR has now told its reporters that certain words are off limits. Those would be the terms pro-life, late-term abortion, fetal heartbeat, and partial birth. Then you might wonder, what are you supposed to call a partial birth abortion? The term of choice is intact dilation and extraction. I doubt anyone outside the medical field even knows what that means. Also off limits are terms like abortion doctor and abortion clinics. These changes seem aimed to try to obscure what happens in abortion clinics and manipulate language that can disguise what abortion really is. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Afshin Ziafat in studio with us today, former Muslim and his journey to Christ. And again, we have that article that is from Decision Magazine. He, of course, is lead pastor in Providence Church in Frisco, Texas. And a little bit later, I might just talk about what they're doing in their church. Also, if you'd ever like to have him come and speak to your group about missions or about Islam or do training, that would be certainly the case. But we haven't finished the story because you had your father sort of disown you, but then there came a time where you kind of brought some healing, and then there was a bridge again. There's been rifts and bridges all the way through that relationship.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So I went to college at the University of Texas, and again, estranged from my dad for a period of time. And God was calling me into ministry. But
Right.
The thing is, my dad kind of took me back in after a year of estrangement and said, okay, fine, you're a Christian, but go and be a doctor and, make me proud. And basically that was the plan. I was studying pre-med. I was going to go to medical school. He was going to pay for the whole thing. And I was going to take over his practice and really be set for life.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically when I felt like God was calling me into ministry, I ran from that, to be
Yes,
honest. And
sure.
so my sister becomes a Christian, both of us separately, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
without any influence on each other. But the Lord called her, and she wrote me a letter and said, Afshin, you're running from God to please Dad. And she said, Afshin, a Christian out of God's will is like a fish out of water. He's going to struggle until he's put back in the water. And she quoted 1 John 2:17, which says, the world and its desires pass away, but the man who does the will of God lives forever. So I knew what I had to do. The hardest thing was I'm finishing UT at the time, about to go to medical school and take my dad to lunch, and my hand was shaking the whole time underneath the table when I said, Dad, I'm not going to medical school. I'm going to seminary. And God's called me to to be a preacher. And so he called it the biggest stain on his life. And I said, Dad, you know how much I love you and how much I want you to be proud of me. And he said, son, not only will I never be proud of you, but I'll always be ashamed of you as long as I live.
Gosh.
And those were the hardest words to hear from your father. But man, I left with $4 in my pocket, didn't have a job, only my first semester's tuition paid for by my church to go to Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth. And God just opened door after door.
Yes.
A free place to live, a businessman who paid for my entire seminary degree. Prestonwood Baptist Church here in Dallas took me on staff as an intern.
Yeah.
And then I became a college pastor there. And then from there, the Lord opened a door for me to have an itinerant ministry and travel all over the country and preach. And then, as you mentioned, of late, the last 10 years or so, I've been going to the Middle East and training Iranian men and women who've come out of Iran and feel called to ministry. And some of these folks are going back to Iran and planting underground churches.
I know.
So it's come full circle. And so, I always say this, first of all, my story isn't about look how faithful I was, because I went kicking and screaming, but look how faithful God is. Today I could be a doctor and have my dad proud of me, but I would have missed the life Christ had for me. And so my urging to any listeners would be, trust the Lord, follow him, whatever he has for you. It may not be the easiest route that you could imagine, but it's the one that is going to be the most fulfilling and used for his glory, and it's worth it.
Just an incredible testimony. I wanted you to hear all of it. And actually, you only heard bits and pieces of it. So you ought to get you invited to some of these events and hear the whole story, because it is amazing. But I wanted to use that to really talk about what God has used you and your church for, because we have always had a real heart for what is happening in Iran. We raised money for a while for what was called the Iranian Bible College, which is not in Iran. It was in Turkey. They'd sneak people out. We recognize, as we've had Joel Rosenberg sitting in that seat, all the things that we wanted to try to do to reach out to so many of these Muslim countries, including Iran. And this has been just a great opportunity for you to really raise up the body of Christ, somewhat underground, but still, it's just a great opportunity for us to support you in prayer, and maybe even to see if there are some opportunities for some of our listeners to participate with you in one way or another.
Yeah, at my church, our desire is for our people to be on mission where we're at. So one of the things we always say is we don't want to be an attractional church, but an incarnational church. So I believe, as Scripture says in Ephesians 4, my role as an elder is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. And you know this to be true. No longer do we have to tell people, travel overseas to reach the unreached. The world is coming across the street from us. We have Iranians, we have Indians, we have all
in my own neighborhood.
All over.
In my own neighborhood.
And so right now, my language is more go across the street and knock on the door. And God has uniquely placed you where you are, in the workplace you're in the school that you're in, soccer fields that you're at as a coach. All of those are not by accident. You are there as an ambassador for Christ. And so we want people who are at Providence to be equipped. Now, if they bring non-Christians to hear, for instance, me preach the gospel, sure, that's great. But at the end of the day, I want them to be equipped to go out. And that's why I say incarnational, just as Jesus put on flesh and entered our world, to you be as the sons of Christ, the sons of God, to go into the world that God has placed you. And don't see your career as just a means to make a living, but also an area of the world that you are a missionary to. So that's what I would encourage anyone, whatever church they're in. But then, as it relates to overseas, there's several ministries I've partnered with. I've partnered with Elam Ministries, Elam.com.
Right.
And really, it's really hard for me to get into Iran, but there's a neighboring country that has an underground training site that Iranians can go there for about 3 months on a visa. And so they have a 3-month training program, and I used to be one of the speakers that go. Now pastoring, I don't do it as often, but I'll go for about a week at a time and train on evangelism and on preaching. And then also I would say, I sit on the council of the Gospel Coalition, and they are starting a TGC Farsi website that is going to be loaded with content that is for Farsi speakers. I would encourage any listeners to go check that out if they know Farsi speakers, and they can benefit from that.
You know, a lot of the articles I write are also in Spanish, and of course, I was just in Hungary and Hungarian. I'm now seeing my articles coming out in Arabic, and I have to hope that they're true because I don't know how to read Arabic, and I'd love to get them in Farsi as well.
That's what you should do.
Yeah, those would be some things as well. But just before we take a break, and first of all, let me just mention, if you'd like to join our conversation, I suspect many of you might have a question about how to reach out to your Muslim friends, neighbors, and coworkers. So let's open up the phones, 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212, or if you would like to listen to this again or pass it on to someone who might want to listen to that, you can go to our website, click on that button that says listen, and you could download a podcast of that, or go to the YouTube channel, and since he's in studio with us today, pass that on to others. But there are people that are probably saying, you know, I've got a Muslim friend, I work with a Muslim friend, got somebody across the street. I'd like to reach out to them, but I don't know what to do. I mean, I know probably don't want to serve pork, and I've got a few other ideas, but what would you suggest? You have probably shared this with others, and this is a national audience that would probably like to know, how can I reach out to my Muslim friends?
Well, I first want to disarm any kind of fears that they might have, even if they were to serve pork. I mean, that's a good suggestion. Don't serve pork, but even if you did, just to remember that, you know what, they're here in your turf, so to speak, and they're expecting you to make blunders like that. So if you were to make that, even a blunder like that,
right,
you just say, I'm sorry. Please forgive me, I didn't know, and then make something else really quickly. I don't know what, you know, I think they would understand, is what I'm trying to say. I think sometimes we have so many fears of, I'm going to make a mistake, that we don't ever engage. And so, you know, I always say, you know, the greatest thing is, can you get to know them? Can you listen to their story? Can you invite them into your home? Help them assimilate into, some of them are brand new. Yeah. You know, for me, I had a real felt need, and that was the English language. And so this lady looked at my family, looked at me, and didn't see threat, but saw opportunity.
Right.
And she poured herself into me and taught me English. So can you think about somebody that might have just moved into your neighborhood who's like, I don't know how to set up a bank account. How do I sign up my kids for school? I mean, those are things, just easy ways to help them assimilate. They have needs. And so I would say, get to know them. Ask them how you could pray for them. I've never even had a Muslim say to me, you know, I don't want you praying because you're a Christian. And then see how you can meet a need in their life. Before I even talk to you about what you should say to them, I would say start there.
I would certainly agree. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the things we might talk about in terms of the love of Christ and about salvation and a variety of other issues. But let me just mention that we have some great resources for you already. We have a link to your website, which is Providence Church. We have an article that is from Decision Magazine, which I really do encourage you to print out, pass around. I think it would be a real encouragement to you and even maybe people in your Sunday school class. But as you go there, you'll also notice that we have a banner there that says Morning in America. We're very excited about some of the things that are happening in this country. And this is one of the reasons why between now and the end of our fiscal year, which ends June 30th, we hope that you'll consider maybe a one-time gift or even a regular gift to Point of View. You can click on that button that says Give Now, and we have a matching fund. So that makes it nice. So if you would like to give $50, it becomes $100. $100 becomes $200. And if you can help us out and appreciate these kinds of conversations, including some very practical helps and hints and suggestions we're going to give right after the break, please visit our website, pointofview.net. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation. If you'd like to join us, let's open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. And Afshin, let's, if I can, for just a minute, talk about what's at your website. It is Providence Church. The website is providencefrisco.com.
Yes.
So that's the way to find it. And there are sermons and resources, various events, and those kinds of things. There's a contact point because I think some people might even be interested in having you come and speak. You know, if I'm doing a missions conference and I want to reach the unreached people group or I want to reach out to the Muslim world, I'm booking you because you would have a great story and a level of experience. And, of course, individuals that maybe just want to benefit from some of the preaching and teaching you've done. It's all there available. What else is available at the website?
Yes, I think all of that. If they want to contact me, I think there's on the leaders page, they can click on me, and then there's an email that pops up. They can send me an email. And then, our podcasts are on there, all our sermons. We've done several conferences, different kinds of conferences. We've done parenting and marriage conferences. And so anything like that they could access. And then, of course, all the sermons that I've preached there. So it's all there.
And I'm thinking, if I'm a young student and I'm wanting to maybe be a missionary to a Muslim world, and maybe have to do that through some kind of tent-making operation because they're not exactly letting missionaries in overtly. I'd like to learn from you a little bit about what you've learned over the years about how to witness, what not to say, countries where I might be able to do a ministry. So would you be available for that kind of consultation?
Oh, yes, absolutely, for sure. Yeah,
Yes.
I'd love to do any of that. I've done a lot of that in the past.
I figured you probably have. Again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some phone calls in just a minute. But the first thing you said is we just need to be authentic. We just need to be real people. And if we make a mistake, hey, we make a mistake. Sorry. But sooner or later, if you develop any kind of relationship with Muslims, they're going to ask this question: why are you doing this? Or what do you believe? Or I thought that all Christians agreed with what the United States has done. Why do you have pornography? I mean, just all sorts of questions almost instantaneously surface. And those very quickly can turn into spiritual conversations, can't they?
Yes, for sure. And I think you're hitting on something very important, and that's the misconception that many of them have that basically America equals
It's
Christianity.
Christian, yeah.
Because,
That's the first disclaimer you have to have.
Absolutely,
Yes.
because over there it's so, for instance, from Iran, it's so tied to the state, the religion. And so, in fact, that's why I think a lot of Iranians are actually open to the gospel, is because they've been disillusioned with the government. And so they're been disillusioned with Islam because of that, and they're much more open to hearing of the gospel. So I think that's first and foremost, is for them to understand that no, Christians are actually in some ways aliens here in America as well. So I think the most important things when the question finally gets to spiritual matters is to understand that at the end of the day, Islam is a works-based religion. And what they believe is ultimately that all their good and bad are going to be recorded throughout their life, and that when they die, all their good and bad are weighed upon a scale, and whichever one outweighs the other will determine if they go to heaven or hell. And by the way, there's a lot of people who sit in churches that I meet, they might as well be Muslim.
Yeah, they think that way.
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, they tithe that way too.
Yes, exactly. And you talk to them that, well, I've done these things, I've done those things. Well, if you think your salvation has anything to do with I've done these things, then you've missed the whole gospel, know. And
so Ephesians 2:8-9, that we are saved by what? Grace, not by works.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so I think I want them to understand, you hit the word grace, because they have a misunderstanding of grace. That first of all, the Bible teaches the beginning of Ephesians 2 that we're dead in our sins and trespasses. And that, in other words, a dead person can do nothing for himself.
Right.
A sick person can maybe go see a doctor or take some medicine. A dead man needs someone to bring him to life. And that's what the message of Christianity is. We are sinners, and therefore we've been separated from God, and we're spiritually dead. So it's not become good enough for God. You can never be good enough. In fact, you're dead spiritually. And so the scale isn't 51%. If you really want to go based on our works, it's 100%. And that's why the Bible teaches all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so that's why I point them to Jesus, which, by the way, Muslims even believe that he was sinless.
Right.
Okay? So I try to teach them this
a sinless prophet. They don't believe he's the son of God or a co-equel with God, but they do believe he's a sinless prophet born of a virgin. So you really have a lot of good starting points, don't you?
Exactly. In fact, I'll come back to that and saying that something just hit me on that. But basically, they believe that he was sinless, but I tell them why. So he was sinless so that he could do that which we could never do. He lived the sinless life, tempted in every way, yet without sin, Hebrews says. And he dies on the cross in our place. And so I take them to the story of Abraham that they know. Now they have the wrong son being offered up,
Isaac,
but I don't really get into
Ishmael,
that.
yeah.
I just say, look, the story of Abraham, and there was a substitute sacrifice that took the place of the son. And so I show them that Jesus is that substitute sacrifice who dies in our place, sheds his perfect blood, that if you receive him when you die, God doesn't weigh your good and bad on a scale. He looks at you and he sees Christ's blood covering you, washing away your sins. But it's not, Christianity isn't just your sins are forgiven. His perfect life is credited to you, so that when the Lord Father looks at you, he sees his son's perfect life. You are in Christ. That's what Paul teaches. And so what I want to tell a Muslim is they understand, okay, I'm saved by grace, but they have a misunderstanding of it, because they think, well, then why would you live for God? And so they're admitting that they believe the only reason someone would live for God is if God had a gun to their head. In other words, if you're not good enough, you're going to go to hell. And so what is that? That's fear. Not the holy fear or reverence of God, but a fear that God's out to get me. If I'm not good enough, I'm going to hell. And I want to show a Muslim that, no, I do good works also. But my motive isn't fear, it's love.
Very good.
And my works are not a means to my salvation, but a product of it, or rather a proof of it. So I live for God, not because I'm trying to get something from him. And by the way, if I'm trying to get something from him, I'm still not living for him. I'm still living for me at the end of the day. But it's only when one is freely, forever forgiven, that then from that vantage point, you can start living for God. Any action you do is actually for him. And so I try to tell them, look, there's something much more powerful than fear, and that's love.
Yes.
Because I've been loved, I want to love. And so how do you reach a Muslim? That's why I say, serve them, love them. Because when you first do, they're going to think, what are you trying to get from me?
Yeah.
Because that's their model, that if you do something, you're trying to get something from me. But once they realize you're loving them, you're serving them, not for anything in return, then their question is going to change from, what do you want from me, to, man, what do you have?
Yeah.
That
Why
I
are you
need?
doing this?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really a great opportunity. Can we take some phone calls along the way?
Sure.
Let's, if we can, head out to, first of all, North Carolina. Paul, what's your point of view today?
Hi, my name's Paul. Thank you for taking my call. I'd like to make a comment in reference to the young man who was sharing about his father, who he had dinner with, and his father said it'd be a stain on his life and the biggest shame he's ever committed. And I say, bless you for following the path that Lord chose you, because when your father mentioned the word shame and stain, it was not your shame and stain, it was your dad's shame and stain, and you followed with the path that the Lord chose for you to do, not your father. And I thank you for that, for being one of the Lord's chosen few.
Well, thank you for saying that. You know, and my heart is, you know, the Bible is clear. It may seem unclear, but in some places it says, you know, honor your father and mother. And then it also says hate your father and mother. So the question becomes, how do you honor and hate your father and mother at the same time? And I think the key is the hate your father and mother means that in relation to your love and your commitment to following Christ, every other relationship would be like hate, that you'd be willing to lose it even. And so there are times where I have to say, Dad, I love you, but I love Jesus more. And so I've got to let go of you to follow Christ. And then, but yet the scripture is also clear that you have to honor them. And so I do honor my father. And I say, I understand that he did what he knew was right. And that's, he had to stand by his Muslim conviction. And so I showed up several times to his house. I remember one time showing up and helping him take leaves out of the gutters, and it was dumping rain and water was getting in our house. Didn't even say a word to him, but just was there serving and loving him. And, you know, it's interesting, over a period of time, his stubbornness actually came down, and he again started talking to me, so much so that, guess what? 3 years ago, my dad actually walked into a church and heard me preach and came up and gave me a hug afterwards. And I wish I could say he's a Christian. He's got Alzheimer's today, by the way. You could pray for him. But I've been able to share the gospel with him, and he has listened and said that he would even consider it. But that was because I not only hated my father by following Jesus, but then I honored him. And I think both are important.
And again, you recognize the cost that sometimes comes with conversion. One of the students we had at Dallas Seminary She was targeted for an honor killing by her father, and her brother chased her all over Canada and the United States until they finally just gave up, and she graduated from the seminary. So we recognize sometimes there is a heavy price to pay for a Muslim leaving Islam and becoming a Christian. We need to take a break, and I'll take another phone call or two. And if nothing else, wanted you to know a little bit more about this incredible ministry that he has. We have some links on our website to Decision Magazine, as well as some of the material there today with Providence Church. But we need to take a break. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take maybe another phone call or two before the end of the hour. All that coming up right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to Nevada. Whitey, thank you for joining us today. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Yes, very simple comment. There are so many intelligent college professors, Christian colleges, professors. Why do they just graduate a student and then they work in the church? Why don't they give them 1 year out in the marketplace before they graduate them, like go to a Muslim country, go to a Buddhist country, do something, or maybe a used car salesman.
Give them some practical ministry experience. I'm a firm believer in that one, don't you think?
Of course. You know why? Because otherwise they are in a cocoon, Christianity cocoon, from Bible college to church. They know nothing about the outside world life,
Well, you are a good point there. First of all, you have a lot of experience outside of the Christian life, but I have seen some individuals go to Bible college, they go to seminary. They've been individuals that I've taught in a Bible school or a seminary, something like that, and they really haven't had too much ministry experience. And I think that's one of the reasons why some of the seminaries and others are requiring some kind of practical ministry experience, or to be an intern like you were at Prestonwood. You just get a chance to understand a little bit more about how ministry works, and then also getting out in the real world and knowing that. And if you're going to be effective, especially in evangelism with Muslims, you really just need to be interfacing with them, don't you?
Absolutely. And that's what, if you're going to go to seminary, Bible college, like this man is saying, I think it's very important for you. Well, first of all, I would say to be plugged into a local church where you're not just going into a classroom, but you're doing life with other Christians, and you're taking what you're learning in the classroom and applying it there, but then being out in the world. And I think that's what Jesus has modeled. He didn't say, okay, come be my disciples and sit down and I'm going to teach you everything. No, he said, come follow me, right, and I'll make you fishers of men, right? And so they walked with him, and they saw him engage hostility. And how did he respond to the Pharisees? And so I think you're not going to get real discipleship if you just sit in a class. Now, that's important. That's helpful, but that's not by itself discipleship.
While we're talking about seminary, I remember there was a seminary study a number of years ago where they were asking hundreds and hundreds of former Muslims why they left Islam and became a Christian. And the number one reason in that study, it was about 700, later it was about 800 students, they found it was the love of God. And, we take that for granted as Christians. But for a Muslim who's in a works-based orientation, who actually wants to fulfill all the requirements of the Quran, to follow the 5 pillars of Islam, to hope maybe in the future that their good works would outweigh their bad works and Allah would give them passage into heaven. This idea that God loves them. And then the second issue that was instrumental was eternal security, that you, as it says in Scripture, could know that you have eternal life. It seems to me that those are some really good conversation points with some of your Muslim friends, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I would say, if someone asked me why Jesus, I would say that the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, that the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the one way that was made for us. When we could never make a way for ourselves, one way that was made for us by which we could be saved of our sins, and that God's justice and righteousness would be satisfied. And that's Romans 3. Again,
right.
That's that he could be both just and justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. You see, I was talking to my father once, and he said, Christianity makes no sense. All you have to do is just say a prayer and ask him to forgive you and accept Jesus, and all your sins are brushed under the carpet. And I said, no, Dad, that's not what Christianity teaches. Yeah. In fact, most works-based religions, like for instance the scale, even if you could be 51% good, which again I say that's not the measure. Yeah. If you want to measure yourself against a holy God, his standard is 100%. But even if you're 51% good, let's say, what happens to the 49? That gets brushed under the carpet. But not so with Christianity. Every sin that you've committed, past, present, and future, is accounted for, paid for by the blood of Christ on the cross when you put your faith in him. And so at the cross, you see both the love and the justice of God. You see God's love in saving sinners, but then Jesus pays for it so that all of God's wrath is satisfied. All of the punishment for sin is paid for. So Christianity is the only way where God can lovingly save sinners, and yet he can stay just. Because if we hear about a judge just letting someone go scot-free, and the evidence is clear that they were guilty, we would cry out for justice. And so it's important for God not just to be loving, but also to be a just God. And in Christianity, you have that. And by the way, one more thing I would say, Christianity is the only faith by which God gets the glory at the end of the day.
Right.
So you talk about eternal security. Let me mention one quick story. I'm at Oregon State University speaking. They canvassed the whole area with pictures of me saying, come here, a former Muslim, speak of Jesus. So big old, student union filled with college students. In the very back, a bunch of Muslim students came and took notes throughout my lecture. And at the end of the lecture, there was a question and answer time. And one of them stood up and said, wait a minute, brother, are you saying you know you're going to be in heaven? And I said, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I know I'm going to be in heaven. And he looked at his buddies and looked at everywhere else and said, that is the most cocky, arrogant thing you could say. And I said, friend, it's completely arrogant for me to say I know I'm going to be in heaven based on what I have done, which, by the way, is what works-based religions teach. But I said, there's no arrogance at all to say I know I'm going to be in heaven based on what Christ has done.
Good for you.
So all of us are going to, when you meet your Maker, you're going to either stand in what you have done or what, and by the way, good luck with that, because you're going to be 100% perfect, or you're going to be clothed in Christ. Yeah.
Let's take one more phone call. We'll go out to Kansas. Tia, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, a few months ago, I have a friend that I've had on Facebook online for a long time, and his name is Mustafa. And one day out of the blue, I was sitting there and we were talking, we were video talking, and he says, I have a question. And I said, okay. And he says, how do I become a Christian? He says, I want to be a Christian. And you could have knocked me out of the chair, you know. and my husband was sitting there by me, and he says, wait, let me do this. And so my husband said the prayer with him and led him to Christ, and he became a Christian. Well, the thing is he was Muslim, and his whole family is. And as soon as he told them that he was a Christian, he immediately, they quit talking to him, and his life has become endangered. And I guess during Ramadan, he was walking down the street somewhere there, and he was drinking water, and another Muslim seen him and ran over and grabbed him and tried to drag him into the mosque, and so they could convince him that he needed to remain a Muslim. And then they were going to call the police, but he managed to get away and run.
Well, we're coming close on time, so I just want to get your comments. What can we do for our Muslim friends that are in danger like that? Obviously, we need to pray for them.
Yeah, that's why. Thank you for that story. And it breaks my heart, obviously, but I would say that, you know, if you're going to share with the Muslim, reach out to them, then you have to have your guest room, be willing to open up your guest room as well. And that's what I would say to people, is that the church really needs to be the church. And a lot of times people do lose their family, and that's where, you know, the church, our spiritual family, needs to come around and is in some ways even more important than our physical family. And so I would say that we need to, again, that's what I mean. You have to have your guest room ready to feed them, ready to take them in. So.
Well, Afshin, I appreciate you being here, and we do have a link so that if people want to ask you other questions, we ran out of time before we ran out of questions, I think, they can contact you through Providence Church. And again, we have that wonderful testimony that you have in Decision Magazine for Billy Graham. So it's just been great to have you in studio, and thank you for taking the time to share with us today.
Well, thanks so much. I hope I can come back sometime.
We will definitely do that. So again, I hope that you have enjoyed the conversation, and if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more, that's why we have this link at Point of View. As you go there, you might also click on that button that says donate, because we certainly do appreciate your financial support and need it as we come to our fiscal year end. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
In just a few minutes, we're going to be talking to our good friend Jerry Newcombe about kind of the role of God in the public arena. He posted an article on about last month on how Democrats are erasing God, and that has to do with now when various individuals are sworn in Congress. We used to require them to swear, "So help me God," but we have removed that, at least the Democratic chairmen have, in various House committees. So I wanted to talk about that for just a minute. And then, in light of the conversation we had last week with the 75th anniversary of D-Day, Jerry also has a piece that just has come out about the unfinished business related to our remembrance of that historical event. As you may remember, as I read the prayer by Franklin Delano Roosevelt that was actually read over the radio, we can see that there was a prayer that was given. There are references to God. Matter of fact, in many of the speeches by Franklin Delano Roosevelt and by other individuals, there were references to God. And yet, if you look at the World War II memorial, there is no place where God is mentioned, no place where faith is mentioned. So we're going to talk about those two issues. What is the place of God in the public arena? And so we bring back to the microphone a good friend of this ministry, Jerry Newcombe, who is the co-author of more than 30 books, many of those that he published with D. James Kennedy, also with Peter Lilleback. He, of course, is the host of Coral Ridge. He is the host of a radio program in which he does all sorts of great interviews. And so as an author, a writer, a broadcaster, he's just a good friend, and bring him back to the microphone. So, Jerry, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Great to be with you again.
Always good to have you on. And I'm going to go for just a few minutes before we talk about the D-Day issue and World War II memorial to go back to one that you wrote back in May. Democrats are erasing God. And although we've mentioned it, I don't think a lot of people are aware of the fact that without a lot of fanfare, some of the chairmen and chairwomen of these House committees, because they are Democrat and because some of them aren't necessarily Christian, or maybe even some of the people that are appearing before their committee are atheist, they've just removed the phrase, "So help me God." And that caused, a few individuals on the panel to say, wait a minute, that's something that is a tradition that goes back for centuries. Tell us more, if you might.
Sure. Well, the whole idea of oaths, taking an oath, is that you're basically swearing before God, who will one day hold you an account, that what you're about to say is true. And, of course, in a godless world, why have a tradition like that if you don't even believe that there is a God? And quietly, behind the scenes, without people realizing it, since the Democrat majority won and they took over in January, apparently they have been quietly leaving out the "So help me God" part of the oaths and just affirming people, or having them affirm that they're going to tell the truth, as opposed to swear and basically say that before God, yes, I'm going to tell you the truth. And it's interesting because in that column, by the way, I mentioned George Washington and how he said in his farewell address, if we ever get to the point in society where basically religious purposes and values and so forth are removed, then there's really no sanction behind the oaths. So, in other words, anybody can say, well, yeah, I'm going to tell the truth. And then they have both fingers crossed or whatever. And there's no intention to tell the truth, and it doesn't matter because there's no God to hold them accountable. But in reality, there is a God who will hold us accountable, and the founders knew this, and they believed it. And the founders, in fact, often said that religion and morality were critical to the success of our country. And in fact, let me put it this way. These are the actual words of John Adams. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. The founders gave us freedom of religion. What the modern atheist is trying to impose on the rest of us is freedom from religion.
Right.
And they're undermining, God and trying to take away God, in the place in our society, left, right, and everywhere, including, memorials and monuments and so forth. And yet God is found right there in our founding documents. And I do mean the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
Well, and again, anybody that has any doubts about where George Washington stood, you and Peter Loback, of course, wrote Sacred Fire, which was an outstanding book. And but even in your piece that we have posted from May, you quote from Thomas Jefferson. Now, let's be honest, Thomas Jefferson could not probably sign the doctrinal statement of any of our churches, but nevertheless, Thomas Jefferson said, "Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are a gift of God?" So even, underscore, Thomas Jefferson understood that. And so you continually see that certain individuals just want to remove God from the public arena. And this naked public square, to borrow a phrase, is something that we have been fighting for many years. And that's something you even talk about on your radio show, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's part of the whole reason that we're, experiencing such chaos in society is because we were designed in such a way that there would be voluntary religion, which would bring about virtue and so forth. But what's happened is, the left is working real hard to remove any kind of acknowledgement of God and any kind of, religion, even voluntary religion and so forth. So, we're left with, like, for example, the humanists, the American Humanist Association, their phrase is good without God. Well, actually, it doesn't work that way. Honestly, I mean, society gets, worse and worse and worse in terms of morality as we get further and further away from God. Now, you got to start with the understanding that there is such a thing as right and wrong. And how do we even know that there is such a thing as right and wrong? Well, if there were no God, we wouldn't know. But there is a God, and he's told us this is right, this is wrong. The Ten Commandments are an excellent summary of what is right and what is wrong. And yet the modern humanist says, oh, no, the Ten Commandments, they're not allowed to be in the public schools. I mean, the Supreme Court even ruled that way in 1980. And that decision, which is still mind-boggling, William Brennan, Associate Justice, wrote in the majority opinion, he said, if the Ten Commandments are posted on the walls of the schools, the children might read them, meditate on them, venerate them, and obey them.
Yes.
And then he went on to say, that may be, nice for devotional purposes, but it has no place. That's a clear violation of the Establishment Clause. Well, I don't agree with him about that Establishment Clause violation, but even there's no sanction for morality if there is no God to hold us accountable.
Well said.
If that makes sense.
It
So,
does.
in other words, those first four commandments, which are the God parts, okay, if there were no God, he won't hold us accountable for the other six parts. They don't lie, don't steal, don't commit murder, etc.
Let's take a break. When we come back, should we add God to the World War II memorial? That's another commentary by Jerry Newcombe. I'd love to get your comments, too. 1-800-351-1212.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
A phrase they often use is, he who defines the words often wins the debate. I've seen this play out in debates, discussions, and interviews. I've also seen how the way you define terms can influence the reader's perception. That is why the latest information about the style guides being used in the media are a reminder to exercise discernment. Take the issue of climate change, or what used to be called global warming. That change alone should signal the fact that words and definitions are being manipulated so that readers could come to a particular conclusion. The Guardian recently updated its style guide in order to show their increased concern over the environment. For example, climate change will now be referred to as a climate emergency crisis or breakdown. The term global warming doesn't seem hot enough, so it will now be called global heating. And a skeptic of all this will now be called a climate science denier. Abortion is another illustration. For years, I've complained that the terms are not parallel. Someone who supports abortion is not called pro-abortion, but is given the more neutral term pro-choice. However, you can't call someone pro-life because they must be labeled anti-abortion. Jared Stepman reports that NPR has now told its reporters that certain words are off limits. Those would be the terms pro-life, late-term abortion, fetal heartbeat, and partial birth. Then you might wonder, what are you supposed to call a partial birth abortion? The term of choice is intact dilation and extraction. I doubt anyone outside the medical field even knows what that means. Also off limits are terms like abortion doctor and abortion clinics. These changes seem aimed to try to obscure what happens in abortion clinics and manipulate language that can disguise what abortion really is. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Is America paying the price for forgetting God, the source of liberty? Well, that, of course, is one of the themes in the most recent book by Jerry Newcombe, American Amnesia. And again, if you'd like to know more about him or that book, we have a link to jerrynewcombe.com. But also there, of course, you can see and hear the various interviews he's done through Vocal Point. And one of those is with Bill Federer, who's been on the program with us as well. But your most recent column, which we have posted, you can find it in WorldNet Daily, but we've posted it right there at pointofview.net, talks about the unfinished business as it relates to World War II. And that is, anybody, Jerry, listening to the president last week who actually read the speech of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. In the past, we've played the speech by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and last week I read it as well, in case people had not heard the president recount that, knows that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a liberal, a Democrat, nevertheless mentions God and has a very definite, heartfelt prayer. And then in your interview with Bill Federer, he mentions all sorts of other times when Franklin Delano Roosevelt mentions God or Christianity or Christian decency or Christian civilization. Yet if you look at the World War II memorial, you wouldn't think that anybody who fought in that war exercised any kind of faith or had any kind of belief in God.
Yeah, it's a real omission, and it's just an example of the political correctness that is choking us in our society in our day. And it took a lot to win that war. It took a lot of effort, took a lot of people. God bless all those people, the people that went out there, serving in the armed forces, the people that stayed home. But there was a lot of things that FDR said about God in very positive ways. I have at my home. By the way, I'm a son where there were 8 children in our family, and I guess I have the reputation of being the most religious of the 8 children. Well, when my dad died, and he served in World War II, he died in 2014, and we were going through his effects, and one of the things that he had was his pocket New Testament that he received when he enrolled in World War II, and it's got a nice foreword by FDR saying that this book, meaning the Bible, has been of great comfort and spiritual encouragement to people through the ages, and I'm happy to give this to you. The Gentile people received the New Testament. Jewish soldiers received a compilation, a shortened version of the Old Testament, again with FDR's opening and so forth. I've got a copy. I mean, I'll show it to you if you ever want to see. I mean, you've seen these before, I'm sure. But anyway, it reflects the way the country was, and part of what helped us to win. Which is the, belief in God and God, calling on God and asking for God's help. And that beautiful prayer, the D-Day prayer. When FDR said that prayer, it is reported that 100 million people listened to him in America on the radio in a nation of 138 million. And then you got to figure, well, there's a lot of soldiers, too, of those 138 million that were in foreign lands. They were either the Pacific or they were over in Europe, but they weren't here stateside, at that time. And imagine that kind of listenership. I mean, you're on the radio. You know what it's like.
For sure.
Well, can you imagine if you were to speak, and 100 million people out of 138 million were to listen? I mean, that's just amazing. And it was this beautiful prayer, and he called on God and asking for God's help, to protect our religion and protect our civilization, and he even mentioned some of the racial arrogancies, of the other side, talking about, and he, by the way, he could have been thinking of exclusively the Nazis, but he also could have been thinking about the way the Japanese were. I mean, they had that same kind of racist mentality, not to the same degree, but there was a racism built in to their understanding and their view, and woe to the person who would surrender to the Japanese, because the Japanese had a very low view. If you surrendered in war, you were a coward and you were not worthy of any respect. And it's a fact that American prisoners of war did worse under the Japanese than they did under the Nazis. In any event, there's a huge difference when a culture takes God seriously versus when they have no knowledge or respect of the Judeo-Christian God.
I might just mention that this is something that people are trying to actually work on. I'd love to hear from you if you'd like to join us even after Jerry's gone. Maybe you have some thoughts about whether or not we should include God in the World War II memorial. But you had a chance to interview not only Bill Federer, but Chris Long. And this all has to do with something that Congress passed a number of years ago, which would actually add a complete text of that D-Day prayer that we read on the air that people can find to the World War II memorial. But time is running out on that project, isn't it?
Yes, and in fact, this is something that was passed in Congress, bipartisan support. President Obama at the time, he signed it into law. And there is a time of expiration. It will expire within a year or so, because it was signed into law 2014. So it is, it's time sensitive, and it's all being raised by private donations and so forth, not through any kind of public money. So the ACLU or that kind of group won't sue to say, oh, you can't mention God, in the public arena. It's like if you mention God in a public document, like saying that this is done in the year of our Lord. Oh, that's unconstitutional. The Constitution was signed in the year of our Lord, 1787. Does that make it unconstitutional? I mean, it's Kerby. This has just gotten so absurd. This nation was founded It was founded primarily by Christians for religious freedom, which they then extended to everybody else. And now we find ourselves in a situation where God is not allowed to be acknowledged in the public arena. It's absurd. Presidents from the beginning have been sworn in on the Holy Bible, and they've said, "So help me God." And George Washington, eyewitnesses said, he leaned over and he kissed the Holy Bible when he was inaugurated. He talked about God in his inaugural address. He then led everybody nearby to the St. Paul's Chapel, and he and the cabinet and the congressmen, the senators, and the Supreme Court members, and the vice president, et cetera, and their wives, they all participated in a 2-hour Christian worship service at St. Paul's Chapel right there in New York City to dedicate the new land to the Lord. And that included, by the way, Holy Communion. And George Washington, according to eyewitnesses, participated in that. And so anyway, we've gotten to the place where, you mentioned God in a public arena, or you swear in, "So help me God," to some witnesses in Congress, and this is somehow not allowed. Who really, honestly, is carrying on the American tradition? The modern atheist who wants no part of God, or the well-meaning Christians and so forth? I mean, I maintain it's the Christians.
Well, if nothing else, just before I let you go, let's talk about what's available on your website, because people can hear the interviews you've done on Vocal Point, including that one that you did with Bill Federer and Chris Long, as well as with Jay Richards and all sorts of other individuals. Then, of course, you've written more than 30 books, so there is an opportunity for people if they're looking for a Jerry Newcombe book, including your newest one, which is entitled American Amnesia, and the concern that we're paying a price for forgetting about God. That is all available at your website, jerrynewcombe.com. But what else will they find when they land on your website?
Well, I also post there a lot of the television segments that we do here at D. James Kennedy Ministries. We're trying to deal with issues on the cutting edge, and so and by the way, I'm really pleased with the search mechanism on my own website. I don't mean to boast or anything. It's not me who did it. It's my webmaster, tremendous guy, Mike at the mic, does such a wonderful job on those things. But anyway, if one went on to the website, jerrynewcombe.com, and then you did a search, for example, of Kerby Anderson, it would go to one of the interviews you and I did where I've interviewed you, or it might even go to one of those posts where it's an interview you did with me about, some other topic at some previous time. So anyway, I'm glad for that search. And so we've got TV content, radio content, the weekly column, and things like that. So
Very good. Well, again, jerrynewcombe.com. And again, we've also posted some material about how indeed there is an effort to add God to the World War II Memorial. I knew you'd want to know about that. So, Jerry, thank you for joining us. Look forward to the next opportunity.
Yes, thank you, Kerby. Have a great day.
We will be back with more right after this.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, open line 1-800-351-1212. Let me point out a few things that are on the website. First of all, we've got some great articles that we've already mentioned with our previous guests. But let me also mention that indeed my commentary today, my Viewpoints commentary, is about the style guide. And the reason I do this is because I have, over the years, made a number of phrases kind of famous or maybe overused. You can decide which. And one of the phrases I use, maybe too often, is he who defines the words often wins the debate. And I have seen this in debates that I've done over the years. Dr. Norm Geisler and I used to do some debates. I've also moderated debates with William Lane Craig and Ravi Zacharias. Matter of fact, I'm going to be with Ravi Zacharias next month at Camp of the Woods. He'll be actually preaching, and then I'll be doing the teaching there at Camp of the Woods. But I've also seen this in interviews, and I've seen it also in terms of the way the news covers stories. And I came to be aware of these style guides back many years ago. This now is decades ago, when I occasionally wrote op-ed pieces for various newspapers, and I got a hold of an AP style guide, and I realized, oh, okay, that's why certain things are worded in certain ways, and that's why certain terms show up and other terms do not. Well, the most recent ones have had, let me just take two issues, and those are in my Viewpoints commentary. One on the issue of climate change, which, by the way, used to be called global warming. Now, just the fact that they changed it from global warming to climate change might already be an indicator to you that maybe people are trying to change the feel. And I came across a piece where it was documenting what The Guardian has created kind of as its style guide. And that is, they really want to try to increase the public's perception about the environment. So, for example, climate change is now to be responded to and reported as and mentioned as climate emergency or a climate crisis or a climate breakdown. So you can kind of see how they're trying to raise the ante a little bit. The term global warming wasn't hot enough, so now they're supposed to use the term global heating instead of global warming. And a person that might have some scientific questions about some of the data is referred to as a climate science denier. So you can see that they're sort of raising the ante just with the way in which terms are defined. There's another way to do this, and that is to say that certain terms will be used and certain terms will be avoided. Long before we had these style guides, I picked that up. Remember, even engaged in a conversation with some people at a round table at the Dallas Morning News about the fact that the terms are not fair, because if you're going to say that those of us that respect the rights of the unborn are anti-abortion, then you should at least call the people that are for abortion pro-abortion. But they don't do that. They call them pro-choice. Well, okay, if you call them pro-choice, why can't you call us pro-life? And instead, those who believe in life in the womb are anti-abortion. Those who believe in abortion are called pro-choice, and you kind of see how the game is not level even at that level. But Jarrett Stepman, who writes for the Daily article there, has actually reported that if you go to NPR, and again, we love National Public Radio, but it is amazing that they've told the reporters, first of all, that there are certain words and phrases that cannot be used in either the verbal reports or even the written reports. And those would be terms like, one I just mentioned, pro-life, late-term abortion, a fetal heartbeat can't be used, and the term partial birth or partial birth abortion can't be used. Okay, in my commentary, I asked the obvious question, whoa, wait a minute. If you can't call it a partial birth abortion, what do you call it? Well, the term of choice is intact dilation and extraction. And I say in the commentary, I doubt anyone outside the medical field even knows what that is. And, of course, other terms that are off limits are things like abortion doctor and abortion clinics and things of that nature. And I think I'm starting to notice that because there has been an attempt to actually pass what I call pro-life legislation, there has been a remarkable pushback, and you've seen that in the state of New York, in Rhode Island, even the statements by the governor in Virginia after some of this has taken place. And more recently, there was an interview done with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, and one of the reporters was asking whether if say she becomes the next president, she won't, but let's just, at least go down the argument that she might be the next president. Wouldn't you want an individual that is independent, judicially independent on the issue of abortion? Well, her argument was kind of telling about where this style guide is going and where the debate is going, because you said, I think there's some issues that have such moral clarity that we have as a society decided that the other side is not acceptable. Imagine saying that it's okay to appoint a judge who is racist or anti-Semitic or homophobic. No, notice the one she's picked, first of all. She's asking someone to appoint a judge who takes away a basic human rights of any group of people in America. I don't think that those are political issues anymore. So it kind of illustrates the idea that, first of all, we are going to demonize anybody who is pro-life and put them in the same category as a person, not necessarily, but she's using the examples of racist, anti-Semitic, or whatever. And so they're basically saying that if you support the rights and the life of the unborn, then you're certainly not going to even be given that opportunity to be considered as a judge. Of course, this is setting up for the next appointment that no doubt will come if Ruth Bader Ginsburg steps down or does not live through the rest of the President Obama term. And so that's one of the issues. But Gary Bauer goes on to say, if nothing else, not only are we saying and seeing that the term pro-life and a pro-life position is not acceptable, but he goes on to say that the left is using this tactic to make a whole host of other conservative values beyond the pale of discussion and debate. For example, to believe in border security is racist. To believe in traditional marriage and that there are two genders is bigotry. To question the solutions and some of the questions about climate change is to be a science denier. And so this game is getting played not only in the style guides, but also in even who could actually be allowed to serve on the Supreme Court. And one final argument before we take a break is that now, as you might imagine, some of the more left-owned businesses are also starting to deal with this issue as well. And the CEO of an underwear company that I've never heard of, nevertheless, is really upset about some of these pro-life pieces of legislation. So as a result, you're having this group as well as these other corporations banding together, and in this joint statement, which was released on Monday, entitled, "Don't Ban Equality." Okay, wait a minute. We're talking about abortion. We're talking about pro-life legislation. We're talking about a heartbeat bill. Don't ban equality. I love, the writer here actually said that this is a assault on the English language. Ban equality. Equality for whom? The unborn child, the mother, the CEO. And again, the paragraph at the very beginning, I kind of think tells you this. Equality in the workplace is one of the most important business issues of our time. When everyone is empowered to succeed, our companies, our communities, and our economy is better for that. Okay, well, don't think I disagree with that. I mean, I know where this is probably leading to. But then the letter goes on to say, restricting access to comprehensive reproductive care, including abortion, threatens the health, independence, and economic stability of our employees and customers. First of all, I love this. Care is the question. First of all, that's supposed to be an activity, a skill, or profession looking after someone who needs help or protection. But again, this is something that is being suggested that it's actually now bad for business to not have abortion laws available for everyone. And yet, again, if I'm in the business of wanting to produce products, one of those particular products that's being talked about right now is Ben & Jerry's. I would imagine that I would want to have more children out there to actually eat the ice cream, but nevertheless, that is the case. And of course, Ben and Jerry's now is also lecturing the consumers about campaign finance. And the writer here suggests that as long as we're killing the unborn in the name of business, maybe you don't have a moral basis to lecture the rest of us on campaign finance. But nevertheless, we're just seeing more and more each day the intolerance that comes from the left, because even suggesting laws at the state level that might protect the unborn are enough to cause many of those individuals to say that if you believe in those, you should not serve on the Supreme Court. And it's just simply bad for business not to have liberal abortion laws. I think we all disagree. I'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention that tomorrow is our weekend edition. Normally, Penna Dexter will be with us. She's going to have to leave for a family issue, and I'll let her explain all that when she returns. But I might just highlight the fact that her commentary tomorrow, which we make available to you actually in your inbox on Saturday. My commentaries go to your inbox Monday through Friday. Hers goes to you on Saturday, but of course we also post it early, is something we may spend a little bit more time talking about tomorrow, but you can read it ahead of time because she has done a very good job on this Viewpoints commentary about talking about the fact that because Donald Trump has been able to appoint so many judges to the various courts, primarily the circuit courts of appeal, Of course, he's put 2 on the Supreme Court, but let's recognize that except for about 70 cases that eventually go to the Supreme Court, every other federal case is decided either at the federal court level or usually at the appeals court level. So what happens in these 13 appeal courts is really important. That's where a lot of the game is being played. And so let me just mention that even once you have the Supreme Court ruling, my first article here today is about the third attempt to actually sue Jack Phillips, the baker in Colorado. This is a very good piece by the editors of National Review, who are basically saying, would we just stop this? The Supreme Court ruled in this case, and after that there was one suit and now a second suit, a third suit now against him, which of course is going to go nowhere, but it's just a nuisance suit by individuals just targeting him. And it illustrates again why some of these decisions at the lower courts are really important. And Penna points out, based upon this one article that came out a while back, that already the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, that would be our listeners in Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, has already flipped. What do I mean by flipped? Well, it used to have various judges appointed by Democrat presidents, liberal appointed judges, and now it is with more conservative appointed judges. And those are individuals that aren't necessarily looking at things from a conservative point of view, as we pointed out before. They're just looking at it from a constitutional point of view. They don't write their own laws. They just simply say, here's what the Constitution says or it doesn't say, and they follow the edicts that come down from the Supreme Court. And as we've seen recently, whether it's the case of Jack Phillips or for our listeners in the state of Washington, Barronelle Stutzman, even when the Supreme Court rules on a case, sometimes the lower Supreme Courts or the circuit courts don't follow. So you can see the problem. So anyway, the Third Circuit has now flipped in large part because of the people that President Donald Trump and his administration have been able to get through the United States Senate. The 11th Circuit, actually, which actually covers Alabama, Florida, and Georgia, really is just one vacancy away from a flip, with one liberal-appointed judge eligible for retirement and another getting close. So that one could flip very quickly. And so that's the Third Circuit, the 11th Circuit. Then we go to some that you would not have expected, and that is the Second Circuit Court. That would basically be New York. And there you have 4 liberal-appointed judges currently eligible to retire, which is only really one vacancy away from a flip. So that's a possibility. And if you can't even believe this, the Ninth Circuit Court, which is the largest circuit, which includes not just California, but most of the West Coast, actually is a situation where there are 8 liberal-appointed judges eligible to retire. Now, the significance of this is that in most of these cases, what happens is you have 3 judges that are selected, and those are selected basically on a coin flip. And so if it's closer to a 50-50 ratio, that means there's a higher probability of a conservative judge will hear the case and rule on it according to the original text of the Constitution and the First Amendment. Well, anyway, that's a really brief summary of Penna Dexter's Viewpoints commentary. We'll post it tomorrow. And I just thought it would be of interest to you. And even though she will not be with us, Dr. Merrill Matthews will be in studio, and Lathan Watts, who is with First Liberty, will be with us. Maybe he can explain a little bit more about that tomorrow. My last article that I've posted here today actually was one that was posted yesterday, but I didn't have a chance to get to it. So I thought, in case you hadn't read it, we would post it again. And it's a piece by our good friend Dennis Prager, who actually in the title of it says, "Leftism Makes People Meaner." And he says that the treatment of Paul Manafort illustrates something I believe since I attended graduate school in the 1970s and saw behavior of left-wing students. Leftism makes people meaner. Now, he goes on to say that, look, there are kind and mean conservatives, there are kind and mean liberals, but neither liberalism or conservatism makes people kinder or meaner. But first of all, I don't always agree with that, but I'll take it at face value. But he says that's not the case with leftism. With the handful of exceptions that accompany every generalization, leftism makes people meaner, even crueler. And to understand this, you have to understand something I've talked about and he talks about, and that is he makes a distinction between liberalism and the left. your classic liberal would be Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We've been talking about him. Or somebody I'm going to quote from in just a minute, the former professor at Harvard, Alan Dershowitz, who's been on the program. And Alan Dershowitz has been the one that lately has been so critical of the fact that there has been a decision by the judge to transfer Paul Manafort, who was the one-time Trump campaign manager, from a federal prison to New York's Rikers Island prison. And here's what Alan Dershowitz, the former professor at Harvard University Law School, had to say. He said the decision to move Paul Manafort from the decent federal prison to which he was sentenced to solitary confinement in this dangerous blank that is New York's Rikers Island seems abusive and possibly illegal. Alan Dershowitz goes on to say, I know Rikers well, having spent there numerous defendants and visiting numerous defendants accused of murder and other violent crimes. It is a terrible place that no one should ever be sent to. It's a place where we send mass murderers. It's a place where we really send the worst of the worst. And again, Dennis Prager talks about the fact that in particular, this is the problem of solitary confinement. Not only is this an awful place, a real hole, as people call it, but also is a place where he's being put in solitary confinement. And so Alan Dershowitz even said on the radio program that what the judge, Cyrus Vance, did, actually he's the district attorney, take that back, Cyrus Vance is the Manhattan's district attorney, but I'll also get to the judge in just a minute. He says reminds him of Stalin and even of one of the prosecutors for Stalin, who actually was doing that. And again, he says that Alan Dershowitz is a lifelong liberal Democrat and supporter of Hillary Clinton, but he doesn't use the reference to Stalin loosely. And then it goes on to give credit to the fact that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez even has tweeted, quote, a prison sentence is not a license for government torture and human rights violation. That's what solitary confinement is. Manafort should be released along with all people being held in solitary. So you have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who calls herself a socialist. You have Alan Dershowitz, a liberal Democrat who supported Hillary Clinton. And, of course, you have Dennis Prager, who's obviously a conservative, pointing out the fact that as the former New York City Police Commissioner Bernard Claret called it, solitary confinement, especially there, is basically a death trap. But it just reminds us that sometimes you have individuals who, because of their viewpoints, end up being very mean and very cruel. And so I wanted you to read that in its entirety, especially when it goes into this long discussion about the devastation that solitary confinement does to the human mind and soul. So again, that's one of the other articles we've posted on our website, pointofview.net. Well, we're out of time today. Let me encourage you to go to our website and click on that button that says Give Now. If you can help us out, we would greatly appreciate that. Hope you'll join us tomorrow for a weekend edition. Want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow right here on Point of View.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.